Hey, I'm CARBO Brother. I'm Chris Nelson, President of CARBO. Really excited to introduce the CZ75 trigger spring kit for your CZ75 series pistols. A really phenomenal kit. This trigger has got a smooth trigger pull. Really nice, no grittiness, nothing like that, but it is a heavy trigger pull. It is a bit of a long draw as well, and that pull is just very heavy, although it is consistent and it is smooth. But there is a way to make it a little bit better. Really love the CZ75. Really nice manufacturing all the way around. Not a lick of plastic except the grips. That is it. It is like the classic way they used to make pistols, guns in general. All machined, just really high quality. That trigger pull is smooth, really nice, really great from the factory from what you'd expect typically, but it does have a lawyer-proof trigger on there, really heavy double action, and the single action is pretty heavy too. So that's something we've definitely lightened up. It's going to maintain all the function, the reliability, but much better performance. A lighter trigger pull is going to make you so much more accurate, so much more capable of getting the most out of that accuracy inherent to the CZ75. Let's get on over tabletop, show you how to put this in. Parts needed for this build: the CZ75 trigger spring kit by MCARBO. Really great kit, includes a nice combination of trigger pull reduction in one solid bundle here. It's not going to compromise any of the performance or function from the factory. It's going to make it just that much better. A nice, really smooth, clean trigger pull. The trigger pull on the CZ75 isn't too bad, but you'll see it could be improved. And that's what I like about this kit. It's an even reduction all across the board. You know, we went lighter on certain springs than we did on others, but it gives you a nice, good, solid, sweet spot trigger pull, which I really like on the CZ75. But other than that, the CZ75's got a nice smooth trigger, just a little bit heavier than it needs to be, so we've got it right in that sweet spot. I really like this. In this kit, you're going to get a lighter hammer spring, a lighter firing pin spring, and a lighter firing pin block safety spring, a lighter Sear spring, lighter trigger return spring, and a heavy-duty firing pin retaining pin, 1,800 pounds shear strength. Really excited about this because the pin that comes with this, notoriously, when you take that thing out, and you'll see here in a minute how damaged this one is. I really had to force it back in. It's a factory pin. They don't last over time. This one will. Tools needed for this installation: a 1/16 inch punch, 3/32 inch punch, 1/8 inch punch, hammer, bench block, Phillips head screwdriver, micro tip flathead screwdriver, needle nose pliers, and as always, guys, make sure we're an iPro. Before we go any further, let's take this opportunity to check our firearms together. Check the chamber, check the bolt face, check the magazine well. This firearm's clear. All right, let's see what kind of factory double action trigger pull we're starting with. 9 pounds, 5.1 ounces. Let's take one more double action factory trigger pull to confirm. 9 pounds, 11.4 ounces. Let's see what kind of factory single action trigger pull we're starting with. 4 pounds, 2.5 ounces. Let's take one more to confirm. 4 pounds, 4.2 ounces. All right, so we'll get started with the basic field strip. You'll notice there's a notch there on the slide and a notch on the frame. Just have to line those two up, and then we're going to push down on a bench block. You'll see there's a little exposed portion right there on the slide stop. So we'll line up those notches, push down on the bench block. You got part of it out. Then I just take my little micro tip and just pop it out. A little simpler that way. All right, so there's a slide stop there. We can set that aside. Now we can go ahead and remove the slide. Just pull it forward. See, there's the inside of the slide here. We can go ahead and continue removing it. So there's the recoil spring and guide rod. Little plastic guide rod there. If you guys are interested in the stainless steel option, let us know. Set these aside. We'll go ahead and pull out on the barrel. Just pull up and out on the barrel like that. Set it aside. Now we'll go ahead and continue tearing down the slide. We need to replace the firing pin spring and the firing pin block stop spring inside here. So what we'll do is we'll remove that pin that holds that firing pin in. We're going to replace this pin as well while we're at it with a stronger pin. And this is a pin I mentioned earlier that's all worn out, really beat up. It's the factory pin. We've removed it a few times and it's definitely taken a beating. So a stronger pin is going to be a great way to get some extra longevity out of some of these weaker points on the CZ75. Take our 3/32 inch punch and we'll go ahead and tap out that firing pin retaining pin. You can see there's that factory firing pin retaining pin right there, and look at that thing. See that big gouge mark in the center? That's what'll happen to it eventually. Eventually this will break. So you can see it's really under a lot of wear and stress. So it's not quite doing the job it was intended to do. Just is a weak point that we can do better with. So we've got a replacement for that. We'll set it aside. Now we'll take our 1/8 inch punch and we'll put it back here on top of the firing pin to compress it a little bit as we remove this 3/32 inch punch right here. All right, now we'll slowly release that firing pin a little bit. pull it out as far as you can. Hear that little snap? That's that firing pin block stop engaging the firing pin. So what we'll do is we'll push down on that firing pin block stop, keep it compressed, and then pull out the firing pin. All right, slowly release that firing pin block stop, just so we can see it all coming apart here. So there's the block stop and its spring. We're going to replace that spring. Set it down just for a second. Now here's the firing pin. One thing I want to point out is that this flat right here needs to be facing the top of the slide. So it'll go in just like that. Nice thing to remember when we go to put it back in. Now go ahead and tap out that spring there. You want the firing pin spring. We're going to be replacing that as well. All right, so we can go ahead and grab our springs. And that's it for the slide. I mean, that was pretty simple. So we'll grab our kit. So we got our CZ75 trigger spring kit by MCARBO. Works for all CZ75 series firearms. All right, so here's a closer look at the kit. Lighter hammer spring here. Here's a lighter firing pin spring here. Here's our lighter firing pin block safety spring here. Lighter trigger return spring, lighter Sear spring, and our heavy duty firing pin retaining pin, 1,800 pounds shear strength. Really impressive, great pin. You'll notice a little different too. It's not that coiled spring. It's actually a much stronger tempered steel slotted spring. So it's actually going to just compress there. It's thicker than the tiny little thin material rolled up into a coil. So it's a much better option. When we do insert that, that slot will be towards the top of the slide. All right, so we can set most of this aside. We're just going to need the firing pin spring and the firing pin block stop spring. So we'll put our kit springs aside, and you'll see how much lighter these are in comparison to the factory springs here. So here's the factory firing pin spring, here's the MCARBO firing pin spring, much lighter. And then you'll see here, see if I can do it without, they're really easy to tell apart. You can see this one, the factory spring, a ton of coils, heavier gauge wire, and the lighter MCARBO spring. So we'll put the factory springs aside, won't worry about those. You know, I got the bag so we can keep them just in case. First, we'll take our firing pin block stop and the firing pin block stop spring, insert that, and then we're gonna drop that into this hole right here, this orientation. Little cutouts facing the inside, and we're going to compress that to get the firing pin inside. So we'll take the firing pin and the firing pin spring, just like that. Remember, we want this recess facing up towards the top of the slide. So you got the top of the slide facing the tabletop right now, so I'm going to put that notch facing down. Press down on the firing pin block stop before inserting the firing pin and spring. Get it all the way in there. It might help too to use your punch just to help you get it all the way flush, and then releasing that firing pin block stop, and it'll go ahead and capture and engage right there. So now we need to put in the firing pin retaining pin, but not the old beat up factory pin there that looks like it's about to break. We need the heavier duty tempered steel 1,800 pounds shear strength pin from the kit. So we'll insert our firing pin retaining pin, not until we've compressed that firing pin all the way. So when you compress it all the way, that hole's gonna line up perfectly, all the clearance we need. I like having it pre-assembled like this because nothing's gonna fly away on you. So what we'll do is we'll get it on the bench block. So we'll go ahead and get our heavy duty pin started. Have this little slot facing the 12 o'clock. So facing the top of the slide. So we want that slot facing the top of the slide. So we'll go ahead and we'll tap it in just a hair because we want to get it started. It's not gonna impact that firing pin for a little while, so we can get it going at least. That way there, we're not trying to compress the firing pin while get this pin started. It does take a little bit to start it. Now we will compress the firing pin. Just make sure you look at it and you can see that flat right there facing the top of the slide. So it does face the top of the slide now. I'll compress it all the way, and then I'm going to finish tapping in that pin. So you'll see we're most of the way there now. I'm just going to take the punch and tap it flush. We don't have to worry about holding the firing pin in anymore. It's all the way recessed. It's nice and located now. We just need to get it all the way home. You can see all those brass flakes from the brass hammer there. All right, keep going. All right, it's nearly there. All right, so now I'm just going to take the 3/32 inch punch and I'm just going to finish it off here. Just want it a little bit recessed. All right, just want it centered up as much as we can, just like that, where it's recessed on both sides. You can see I got a little bit of those brass flakes everywhere. All right, cool. So we got the lighter firing pin spring in there now and the lighter firing pin safety block spring in there as well. So we've also got the heavy duty firing pin retaining pin. The slide is pretty much done now. All we have to do is just throw that barrel in, just like that. And then the recoil spring and recoil guide Pop them right in place, just like so. All right, we can set the slide down for now. We are done there. All right, so now we can tackle the last 3 springs in the kit that are in the frame here, the trigger return spring, the Sear spring back here, and then the hammer spring down here inside under the grips. So we'll go over how to do the trigger return spring first. So with the trigger return spring, it's really simple. There's one pin that holds it all together. It holds the trigger in place and the trigger return spring in here. So the pin though has got a wider end on it. So one end is a little bit more narrow than the other, and that wider end is generally on the right-hand side of the frame, so we'll press it from left to right. So we'll take our 3/32 inch punch and we'll press it right out. Now before we do that, I just want to point out the orientation. So on the long leg on the trigger return spring, it rests and it's captured right here on the frame. You can see that. And then you can see that little short leg drops inside the trigger and it's captured down in that pocket right there. And it'll become more clear here in a second, but you can get a good general idea how that thing is oriented in there and captured. So it's always handy to know where we're going once we get this pin out. So we'll press that pin out and likely give it a few good taps on the bench block here. 3/32 inch punch. You can see the pin is starting out. Now if your pin doesn't move, it's likely you might be hammering from the wrong side. You know, I don't know definitively if that is the only orientation of the pin, but generally it's from left to right. And you'll notice here on the hinge pin, you can barely see it. It's a little bit wider there on the right side, a little bit more narrow here on the left. All right, so something to keep in mind. So now all we got to do is remove that punch holding that trigger return spring in place. It is handy just to put something over top of it, so I'm going to take that micro tip and just kind of hold it down in, because this will fly away on you. All right, so there is the trigger return spring there. You can see that short leg that was down inside. I'm going to go ahead and set the factory spring back in the bag. This one's red, and I think most of them are red, so it's easy to tell. Now we're going to grab the lighter MCARBO trigger return spring. And with this spring also comes the little assembly tool in the kit. I don't believe I went over the assembly tool initially. It's hidden in the bag. It is very tiny, so it's easy to miss. So I've got the trigger return spring positioned just like this. I'm going to drop that short leg straight in. I'm kind of going in the front. That way I can get it to clear that little lip on the trigger and press that short leg all the way in as far as I can. All right, now I'm going to hold it in place with my thumb there and grab that little assembly tool and drop it right in. The assembly tool is in place. Now I can let go of that trigger and trigger return spring, and it's captured and held, which is awesome. This makes it so much easier. Now we put the linkage back in, and then we'll take the little micro tip and kind of steer that long leg into the channel there. All right, it's captured in the channel. All right, so now we need to take the trigger hinge pin and insert that into the trigger in the frame. We need to line up the holes on the trigger in the frame. So we'll line up that top hole on the trigger, pull down on the trigger most likely, or push it down from the inside there. There's 2 pins in the trigger. So there's that little pin at the bottom there that connects the rest of the linkage, and then there's the top hole, which is where the trigger hinge pin goes. So that's what we're shooting for there. Trying to line those up. Insert the pin on the right-hand side of the frame. That wider end of the pin will be on the right-hand side when we're finished. I'm going to press down on the table as I try to line it up here. And now from the opposite side, you can take your 1/16 inch punch to help you steer it. All right, pressing down the table, it's starting to go. Check the inside there so you can see the assembly tool. So you can see the pin just punched through. The assembly tool is still in there. So we'll push that little assembly tool through the rest of the way, out the hole. Push our pin through, making sure that it captures, the coils there on that spring. And grab the bench block and continue pushing through. Almost there. All right, that little assembly tool fell out. Don't need it anymore now. Now I'll just take my hammer and give it a few taps. You can pull on that trigger to make sure it's lined up. All right, there it goes. So it's already starting to go through the hole on the opposite side of the frame there. Take my 1/8 inch punch and I'm just gonna level out this pin over here. There we go, easy as that. All right, so that pin's fully located now. It's flush over here on the right side where it's flared and it's wider, so that's good. So it's completely captured. And that trigger return spring feels nice and light now. It feels good. Trigger return spring alone is really a nice help. Now we're going to install the lighter Sear spring and the lighter hammer spring. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and replace the Sear spring down here. So your ejector's right here. This is your Sear right here. This is your firing pin block lever right here. This will move freely, and there's a firing pin block lever spring down here. It's very tiny, hard to see. So we're not going to replace that. Just want to point it out so we don't lose it. So first thing we'll do is we'll pull up on that leg of the Sear spring so that it's free from that pin. So if you notice right there's a notch in that pin for that little leg to drop into. So we want to make sure we'll pop it up, push it to the side like that, or you can just leave your screwdriver underneath of it to keep it free. And you'll notice that the safety, obviously the lever's over here and the pin's on this side, so we'll push out on the pin here and get it to go all the way through. And once you got most of it out, it'll be easy to continue removing it, just like that. All right, we'll set that lever down, and then we'll pull out on the ejector, and the whole assembly will just come right out, just like that. So there's nothing really to worry about here. It'll just be a matter of dropping it back in and lining up those holes, so it's pretty simple. Now what we'll do here is further disassemble this. Very easy, very straightforward. It's just a pin right here that holds the Sear in place, and that firing pin blocking lever. If you look really closely, you can barely see that firing pin block lever spring right there. It's super tiny. It's not a big deal. You can see one of the coils right there. But we don't really want to mess with it. We don't have to. So we're just going to push on this side here, the side with the ejector on it. We're going to push on that side so that we keep the pin intact for that firing pin block lever and spring. We want to address the Sear spring in here. Notice how that little short leg of the Sear spring presses right up against the Sear like that. Long leg, obviously, it pushes up here, and that's what locates in that pin for the safety. So we're going to push right here on this side so we can get that Sear spring out. 3/32 inch punch, and there's the Sear spring. Simple. So we'll just drop that right out. There it is. Now we're going to drop in our lighter MCARBO Sear spring just like that. We can remove the factory spring. We're going to focus on lining up the holes now on the coils of that spring. And what you want to do is position that leg there in the back. So you can kind of press against it in the back there. You want that little short leg almost level with the top there. But you're going to do your best initially just to get that pin through the hole first and foremost. But I've noticed that little short leg will tend to want to bind on you sometimes. In this case, it just went in real simply. And I'm just working it the rest of the way through by hand. And you'll notice you got a little alignment issue here, so we just pull forward on that Sear and it lines right up. And just keep pushing through, and there it is. So that's a real simple exchange right there. You know, it's still intact. Still got our Sear in place. You got our Sear spring in there. Little short leg locates right at the top, nearly, on that Sear, and that long leg up here. Real simple. So now we're going to drop this mechanism back into the frame. Literally drops right in like that. Push it all the way back, and what we'll do is we'll look at this small hole, and we want to line it up. So we're going to push it all the way back. You have to push back on that hammer a little bit, and that'll line it up for the most part. You can see that little leg of the Sear spring in there. That's what's going to locate on that pin. So that's just a preview there. The first hurdle we have to cross is that little tiny detent right there. So what we'll do is we'll get the pin started. So we'll push back on the Sear assembly so we can get the safety lever in. And you'll notice there's the notch facing up. You'll notice these little teeth back here. That's what locates on the detent. So we'll get the lever in most of the way. And you'll see there's that Sear spring. That little leg is ready to jump on top of that pin. There it is, it's in place. And we'll keep pushing back on this Sear assembly until that pin won't want to go any further. And you'll know it here in a second. So push back on the Sear assembly. It'll push back on the hammer a little bit. Holes lined up. Keep pushing forward with that safety lever, and then it basically stops right there. All right? And what that is the detent inside. And those are the teeth right there that the detent will locate into. So we want to pull back on those little teeth that allow you access to the detent. You can see it moving right there. So I'm pulling back on that detent, and then I'm going to snap that safety lever right in. Good snap. Perfect. So now the safety lever's in. Let's just make sure that leg of the Sear spring drops right into that channel on the pin. There we go. Fully seated in there. Awesome. We got the Sear spring replaced. Pretty easy. Now it's just a matter of replacing the hammer spring inside the pistol grip. So we'll take our Phillips head screwdriver and we'll remove the grips. All right, move the grip on the other side. All right, set the grips aside. Now you can see the hammer spring in there. Real simple and easy. It's just a matter of pushing down on the mainspring plug and releasing that mainspring plug pin. And then the whole mainspring comes out, AKA hammer spring. And then the magazine guide in here is something that will need a little manipulation to get it all the way in. I'll show you how the magazine guide works. It just does like it sounds. It guides the magazine all the way in. So it's pretty straightforward. You know, it's held in by a pin up here. I'm gonna show you the way I do it, the way I get the magazine guide back in. You know, there may be a better method. It's entirely up to you how you want to do it, but I really like this method that we're going to try. So to get this mainspring out, to get the hammer spring out, you're basically just going to push down on the mainspring plug on your table and then take your 3/32 inch punch and push out that mainspring plug pin. All right, smooth pin all the way around, universal, and then keep your finger on that plug and pull out your punch. You'll notice the orientation there. So the little channel cut out, here's where that magazine guide will go. All right. And you'll notice how that little magazine guide has a little bend in it. All right, that's what naturally happens once it goes in. You can hear how it's just clicking against each coil on the spring. So if you try to insert it back in, it's not doable. So there's the problem, and I'll show you how we're going to get past that here in a second. So then the magazine guide, just, you know, it's really flimsy. It's pretty durable spring steel here, but what we want to do is straighten it out. So it was straight before, now it's curved again. So if you look at the exploded view, it shows it curved. You know, it's very straightforward. I'm just going to flatten it out. It's very malleable. You know, this happens naturally when it goes in. You'll notice that slot right there. That's where it locates. And you'll notice that inside that hole, you know, there's nothing. You can see the edges right there of that slot. So it locates straight in that hole with the spring and the plug. And you'll notice there's a cutout on the plug for that little tab to locate into. It's not a big deal, so we just straighten it out, make life a lot simpler. So now we're going to replace the factory spring with the lighter MCARBO hammer spring. Set the factory spring aside. All right, now make sure your hammer's forward. Grab your lighter MCARBO hammer spring, mainspring. You're going to drop it right in this hole here and center it up over that hammer strut. See the hammer strut in there? So we're going to drop it right in, sliding it on. Now make sure that hammer is forward. Don't let that hammer cock back on you, and we'll compress it. So you can either set the frame on the bench block like this and compress the spring, or I just prefer to use the table. We'll take the mainspring plug and we'll put it over top of the mainspring, hammer spring, and we'll compress it. This opening is going to be facing the inside of the magazine well, because that magazine guide, that little tab, will locate in that little cutout there. And then the pin will go right through. So we'll go ahead and compress. As we slowly compress, we want to make sure that spring goes through, no problems. You know, don't let it bind or kink up as you're compressing. A good even force there. And then take the pin, we're going to push it right through. And if it's kind of meeting some hesitation, you know, push down a little bit harder on that table, you'll be good to go. Now, if it wasn't lined up correctly, you could also take your punch, you know, and kind of line it up, steer it from the opposite side as you're pushing that pin in. But it usually will go in pretty easily as long as you're pressing good and hard on that table. Now we've got our magazine guide. Hopefully you straightened that little tab there, because it'll just push right in. Super simple. Get it started, and then it flips right up just like that. Perfect. So our magazine guide is intact. Press down on it, make sure it's, you know, good and flush there with the frame. You can check it. Make sure the magazine feeds well. It does as it's intended to do. It guides the magazine right through. So that's perfect. All right, so we're all set there. So we got all the springs replaced. Now we just got to put some simple things back together and we're good to go. Now we'll go ahead and put the grips back on each side. Now we've got the grips back on the frame. We'll go ahead and we'll take our slide and we'll insert that back into the frame. Line up slide, and we'll push it all the way back until those two tick marks line up. And then we'll take our slide stop and we'll drop it right in. Snaps and locks in place, we're good to go. Now let's do a quick little function check. Place it on safe, check the safety. Good. Let's test the single action. Ooh, that's light. Double action, oh man, this feels beautiful. All right, let's go ahead and check the trigger reset. Pull the trigger, hold it at the rear, charge it, resets, perfect. All right, let's see what kind of modified trigger pull we got. We're gonna test the double action first. 5 pounds, 0.2 ounces. Let's take one more to confirm. 4 pounds, 6.6 ounces on the modified double action trigger pull. Man, that is nice. All right, now let's test the single action trigger pull. Single action modified trigger pull. 1 pound, 13.4 ounces. Let's take one more to confirm. 2 pounds, 1.8 ounces. Man, that is sweet. I knew it was light, but dang, I didn't realize it was that light. Oh, that's beautiful. That's right where it should be right there. That is awesome. Well, there you have it, guys. A 50% trigger pull for your CZ75 series pistols. I love it. It already had a nice smooth trigger pull, but now it's got a much lighter, more consistent trigger pull, which I really like. I mean, a 5 pound double action just feels much more natural than the 9 pound double action. A 9 pound double action is just, doesn't make any sense. And I've even heard them being higher than that. I've heard them being up to 11. So it just depends what you have, when it was manufactured. This one here started factory, 9 pound double action. We got it down to 5. And the single action, it started at 4 and we got it down to 2, which feels perfect. And that's what it should be. Now, you may be saying, well, 2 seems pretty light. Well, it's got a decent amount of pre-travel in that trigger, so it's not like it's just a hair trigger waiting to go off. It is much more natural. Once you put it in, you'll see it, and it feels like what you would have expected from the factory initially, because it's got a really nice smooth trigger pull. It's just that trigger just a little bit heavier than it needed to be for such a nice, smooth, consistent trigger pull. It was just really, I don't know, it didn't make any sense. It was like almost done intentionally, you know, for legality reasons, whatever. But this is gonna make it so much more accurate, so much more consistent. You know, when it's in your hands and you're shooting, it's just going to be a better performer all around. You're not going to have that big wide variation from a massive trigger pull to a medium trigger pull. You're starting out with a medium double action trigger pull, and then into that nice light, smooth, consistent single action. It's right on the mark there. I really like it. Spot on. I think it's going to be a winner right here. I'm really excited to hear what you guys think about it. I mean, the CZ, I love it, the quality, the craftsmanship that went into it, but my initial turnoff was that trigger. Yeah, it was smooth, but I was just like, ah man, that trigger is just heavy for no real reason. Didn't make any sense. So I'm really excited about this. Thank you, MCARBO Brotherhood, for your ideas and your support, and as always, happy shooting.